In October of 1962, audiences found Vincent Price back on the big screen in the Roger Corman remake of Tower of London. The film opens in England 1493, where King Edward IV, played by Justice Watson, lies on his deathbed. His brothers Clarence, played by Richard Macaulay, and Richard, played by Vincent Price, gather round the bedside as the king names his successor, his eldest son and namesake, Edward V. But Edward is too young to rule, so the king names Clarence to be protector of the realm and guard his son's safety, meaning he holds much power and sway over the throne. Richard congratulates Clarence and takes him to the wine cellar for a celebratory drink. Once there, Richard backstabs his brother and dumps him into a giant vat of wine.
Stop! Richard! For the love of God!
The dagger he uses bears the crest of the Queen's family, the Woodville family, thus casting suspicion onto Queen Elizabeth, played by Sarah Selby. Afterwards, Richard is haunted by the ghost of his dead brother, who appears before him and issues a prophecy.
You will die in violence, the hands of a man already dead.
Richard's wife, Anne, played by Joan Camden, consoles him and assures him that he only did what was necessary. The following morning, Richard is back to his scheming ways. He calls the Queen's chambermaid, Mistress Shore, played by Sandra Knight, and attempts to get her to testify that the king's sons are illegitimate. She refuses, and he sends her to the torture chamber. She still refuses to falsely testify against the Queen and dies on the rack. Later that evening, Richard is again visited by a spirit, this time the ghost of Mistress Shore, who reiterates that he shall die soon, mocking his deformed back and limp in the process. She tricks him into killing his wife, choking her to death in an attempt to silence the specter. The Queen, meanwhile, consults the court sorcerer, Tyrus, played by Richard Hell, asking for his help to uncover proof of Richard's betrayal. Tyrus convinces Richard that he can cast out the evil spirits that haunt him, and in a flaming ritual, Richard is again visited by a spirit, that of his dead brother King Edward, who vows to protect his sons from Richard's treachery.
I would protect the sons of my seed and all those who cross your murderous path, Richard!
Richard takes the Queen's lady-in-waiting, Lady Margaret, prisoner. She also happens to be the daughter of Lord Stanley, ruler of Scotland. Richard sends word to Lord Stanley that he shall kill his daughter unless he pledges allegiance to Richard. Richard, now power-mad, decides to remove all remaining obstacles to the throne, and together with his right-hand man, Ratcliffe, played by Michael Pate, smothers the two young princes in their sleep. Once again, he is later visited by the ghosts of his victims, the two young boys who almost persuade him to walk off a castle battlement.
Richard!
Lady Margaret, however, escapes Richard's castle and her father's troops advance upon England. Richard, furious, proclaims himself king and leads his armies onto the battlefield, where Lord Stanley's armies and the ghosts of Richard's victims combine to stop him once and for all. Tower of London was shot by director Roger Corman for United Artists. Executive producer Edward Smalls is also the man who financed this film, and it was his decision to make this movie black and white, something that director Roger Corman was informed of at the last minute. He had fully intended to shoot this film in color. This decision was made, no doubt, so that they could lift the battle sequences featured at the end of the film from the previous 1939 Universal version of this movie, thus adding instant production value. The plan backfired, however, as the lack of color ultimately hurt the film, which would have been more effective and a bigger box office draw in color. Black and white was a tough sell in the 1962 Technicolor world. In the 1939 version of this film, Price played Clarence and Basil Rathbone played the scheming Richard. The scene in the wine cellar is very reminiscent of a similar scene from the original version, except that this time Price gets to do the dunking instead of being the victim. Price does an excellent job in the role of the hateful, misshapen Richard. He plays the part with a sneering glee, fully embracing the villainous role. The character of Mord the Executioner from the 1939 film is missing in this one. In his place is the torturer Gelder, a far less imposing figure than the memorable Karloff character. Tower of London is actually a much better movie than I'd been led to believe. It's a darker remake of the Universal original, focusing on the macabre elements of the story, with tortures, murder, and ghostly apparitions aplenty. Of special interest in this film is the character Tyrus, the court sorcerer, who spends much of the movie with a black raven on his arm. Director Roger Corman's next film would continue this theme, with Price and Boris Karloff squaring off as a pair of rival magicians, along with a scene-stealing black raven in The Raven.
Here at the bank, we've discovered a fascinating pastime. Hangman. Each player puts a word here. Wrong window. Then they try to guess each other's words. L?
Nope. G?
No. Endorse it. Q?
R.
Right. A?
Nope. L?
No. N. Wrong bank. If you have a little time to kill, get.
Hangman! I won!
I can't play with these interruptions. Hangman from Milton Bradley.